Okay, welcome to this, our second class. We want to think critically today about sustainable development. You'll remember in our last class we talked a little bit about a definition for sustainable development and what it is, and also the syllabus a little bit, but we want to start poking holes in sustainable development today or in thinking critically about it. But first, what I would like to do is have a devotional thought because, as I've said to you before, I really think that it is the Scriptures and the Word of God that gives us the most compelling messages on anything, but sustainable development too. So I'd like to read a couple of passages for you, one from Matthew 27 and then one from Colossians 1. And again, if you have any questions at any time, please just raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon or typing it into the box. I prefer you use the hand icon. Matthew 27 comes from the occasion when Jesus gave his life, and it says as follows, that at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake, all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." I think those riveting moments in development history happened about a year ago, and that was the Great Haiti earthquake of 2010. Many of your predecessors who've already graduated are working in Haiti, or some people did their development practicum there. It was just a major, major event. And there's another earthquake, too, that is quite an important event, and this happened at the time of Jesus' death. And it's an event that, to me, makes a lot of sense as to why there would be an earthquake, because we do know that Jesus is the creator of all, and he holds everything together. If he were to die, and we know that he did, his released grip upon all of creation would make the earth shake. The Creator, the one who holds it all together, is no more, and it just makes sense that the earth would shake. Colossians 1:17 says, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." You know, sometimes we like to sing that song, "He's got the whole world in his hands," and that is what we believe, that he holds it all together. And if he is no longer there, if he has died, his grip is released and the earth shakes. Let's have a prayer together. Jesus, thank you for this time when we can meet online and still study your word, still pray, still begin to think about your world and our place in it, what your will be for all creation. Go with us this day. Keep us safe in this treacherous weather, and form us and shape us into your disciples. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, ask a question anytime. Justin, I see that you are asking about an earthquake, and you are going to Costa Rica. You will be able to see a little bit of earthquake damage. The small village that we are going to be visiting was rocked by an earthquake. I don't remember the year. It was 2008 or 2009, something like that. Sustainable development is a crazy, crazy concept. As you know, we talked about this last week. It is extremely complex. It's basically includes a little bit of everything. Some of you may have studied what some scholars are talking about these days, the TOE, or theory of everything. Is there one theory that holds everything together? And how complex that must be, and sustainable development is too. And so you see these people here trying to make sense out of sustainable development, and it's kind of crazy. So that's what we want to do today, is to continue talking about sustainable. There's something that I said that we really need to always make sure is in our discussions. Do you remember from last week what that is? Yes, Jocelyn.
3 E's.
That's right. I'd probably give you a piece of candy or something if we were in class, but I can't really do that digitally.
You can give it to me next time.
Okay. The 3 E's. Very, very important, okay? I can't remember who put their hand up next, but somebody want to say what those 3 E's are? Justin Best.
The 3 E's are human equity, economics, and like creation care, like environment.
Yep, that's it, okay? You need to always be strutting your stuff to me when you write in your PSDs. At all times, show me that you know and that you are struggling to keep all these 3 things on a par, okay? Because we've just got to discipline ourselves in this way. When you ask a question, okay, they're ranked by timing here for me, so I get a 1, 2, 3. I don't know if you were able to see that or not, so I know who has the question first. Justin, do you have a question?
Yes, and I was just wondering, could you give us, after you're done grading our PSDs from the first time, could you just give us a little bit of feedback to kind of let us know how we did the first time and what, just to get a better gauge of what you're looking for? I know you gave us that thing in the syllabus, like the grid, like the rubric, but just maybe some feedback would be helpful, I think.
I will do that. Be delighted to. And if I ever don't give you enough feedback, feel free to push back. All right, so our 3 E's are equity, economy, and environment. This is what I want you to do right now. I want you to just shout out. No, let's do some typing right now, just because it would be kind of crazy. We're going to pause and linger just a minute with equity, and I want to hear from you what you think are some of the issues that relate to equity. In other words, if you're going to be a development practitioner and you're trying to address issues of sustainable development, what are some things that you're going to want to keep in the back of your mind, okay? So for equity, for example, I would type in, and I'm doing that here, gender issues, okay? And as I see you type things down in the left there, I'll put it in as well. But what's involved here? What are some of the issues? If we could break that down a little bit better. Class, housing and land. Let's say land ownership. How about that? And housing. Land could be an environmental issue too, but yeah. Cultural values. Mm-hmm. Any others? Okay, there's some of the good ones. Justin says choice, as in having choices. It's kind of hard to keep all of these in the same, in a line here. I'm going to add one more, okay, and that is power. I think you're going to have to always be asking questions. Who has power in this situation? What is this about? Who is it for? Who calls the shots here? Power is probably one of the most important. Yeah, Emily's saying local leadership. Yeah. All good ones. Eminent domain. Yep. Todd is raising the question there. If you know what eminent domain is, it's that the government can condemn land or take over land, appropriate that, like if they want to build a highway there or something like that. How about economy now? Let's switch over to economy. Did a good job. I'm going to try and draw a line here. And let's do economy now, okay? What would be some of the economic issues? For example, I'll type in jobs. That would be one. What are some of the other economic issues as we move on to the second E? Resource management. Okay. Money, loans, credit. You're saying these things. Unemployment. Social capital, I don't know, I maybe would put that more towards equity. Consumerism, that's a good one, Terry. Terry, when you talk, you're sending it directly to me. Please make sure you send that to the main room so everybody can see it. So in that pull-down menu, you want to select main room and not just Stan LaQuire. Let's see here, consumerism. All righty. Yes, Terry.
I don't see one that says main room.
In the extreme lower left.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, good. All righty, time to draw another line, and we'll move on to environment, okay? What are some of the issues here? One I might add would be biodiversity, you know, the complexity of life that's there. Deforestation, great tip. Climate, water, soil erosion. Access to water, that's interesting. That could be a power issue too, couldn't it, Jocelyn? You want to flesh that out a little bit? How could it be a power issue? Or anybody? Some of you may know what's gone on in Bolivia recently with the privatization of water. It was a huge issue. It's just been turned into a movie. I heard about that just today. I forget the name of it. But of where a company had come in and was trying to privatize water and would be selling it to people. Yes, Terry.
I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh, okay. If you could click on your hand, that will clear that. Justin, then, how about you?
Well, in regards to water, I was thinking of, you know, the Fiji water?
Yeah.
Well, apparently, people in the United States are able to access that water, whereas like 40% of Fijians aren't. So we are more likely to be available to have water from Fiji than 40% of the population. I think that's definitely a power issue and a problem.
Yep. Somebody says malaria. I'll put that down here, malaria. It could be an equity issue, too. But definitely malaria is an animal. It's a part of biodiversity. It's not an animal, but you know what I mean, a parasite that gets transmitted. Malaria also has huge economic consequences too. So as you can see, all of this is rather complex and diverse. Yes, Terry, you have a question?
I just want to comment on the access to water. In a lot of the readings we had is, especially in the poorer countries, that the runoff from the factories causes pollution in the groundwater.
Yep. Bingo. Great. And what an amazing segue that is into our next slide. But let's see what Todd has to say.
Yeah, about the malaria, one of the cheapest ways to control malaria is to put a film of oil over standing water to kill the mosquito larvae just by suffocating them. But then, of course, that becomes an environmental issue to put oil on the water.
Yep. All right, Terry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. That's all right, you guys. Whenever you, I forget that you'd already talked. Whenever you ask a question and it gets answered, then click on the hand icon again. All right, so we have quite a mess here talking about the 3 E's: equity, leadership, power, choice, class, land ownership, economy, jobs, money, loans, credit, and, of course, all the environmental issues, too. So I guess you could see that it is a complex issue, like people. All right, one thing that I really like to do in my classes, those of you that had me before know this, is I like to ask what's in the news. And so we're going to go on and talk about sustainability in the news. And I guess it would be easier in class, we could have some discussion here, but maybe easier for me just to go right on and talk about perhaps one of Pennsylvania's greatest environmental issues right now, and that is the Marcellus Shale. I may have misspelled that. It might be A-S at the end instead of U-S. Anybody want to weigh in on what this issue is all about? Yeah, that's because I'm waiting for somebody to jump in. That's probably why you can't hear me.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't have any of the articles ahead of me, but I thought I heard that oil can be extracted from shale by, amassing huge amounts of it and then squeezing it out. But then that would cause problems environmentally as well.
Yeah. Well, you're close. Emily, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it that they're looking at drilling for natural gases or something, and if they break through that, it may ruin all the water for a certain area in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, we'll put together a bit of yours, Emily, and then a bit of Todd's as well. But yeah, what it is that there is a rock formation that runs through Pennsylvania and actually goes into New York and then south into West Virginia as well, and parts of Maryland, I think, where there is natural gas that is somehow in these rocks, and scientists have discovered that by going down and forcing water down in there with some toxic chemicals, they have a fracking mixture, they call it. They are able to pump this gas out. And so there are a lot of issues with this, and just so we can begin to think about sustainable development and what some of the issues are, I've got our 3 E's here, okay? Say, for example, you're a farmer out in western Pennsylvania or something like that, and you know that there's a company that wants to develop, okay, you're all about economic development, right, that wants to develop the Marcellus Shale and the resources in those areas. So thinking about sustainable development, what are the economic, environmental, and equity issues here? If you could type those in to that lower box, I would appreciate it. What are the issues? What would you imagine the issues to be? Okay, Jocelyn says, Emily says first, what do the locals think? What about the health and the homes for the local people? Access to water, Justin says. Environmental destruction of the groundwater, Terry says. Okay. All very good stuff. So yeah, if you're drilling, you're going to drill down in this and you're pumping in this dirty water. There have been some people that have claimed that their wells, their drinking water has already been polluted. And so that is going to be one too. Yeah, what are you doing with those toxic chemicals and with that water? Economic, farmers could lose their living. Another economic issue, Terry, is that the farmers may actually be able to make a little bit more money from the selling the drilling rights than they could from farming. Farming is hard work, okay? Will fracking bring jobs? That's an economic issue. As you probably know, western Pennsylvania is not very economically developed. That's where the shale is. So this could be a boon to that area. Does it make sense in the long run, Justin asked. That's what you have to think through, right? You've got your MA in economic development, so you want to think through all that. Any other comments about that? Yes, Rachel.
I was going to say that it always seems like in situations where, a company wants to come into a community, they try to emphasize the economic side of it and kind of downplay the other two, like the equity and the environment. Like for example, like mining in Guatemala is a big issue, and they always try to convince the people that it will better their community because of economic reasons, but meanwhile, like their health is really negatively affected and other things, So, and I guess in this situation, I think the same thing, like even for the farmers, if they make money selling their land, is it really worth it if their health is going to be affected,
Yeah, good stuff. Justin approves too. He gave you the thumbs up. Okay. Good discussion. So it does not appear, however, that we've reached any kind of conclusion, and I think that, again, just illustrates how complex all of these issues are. Also, it seems that as far as equity goes, that has been an issue that we have not addressed very thoroughly. I think the equity component here would be who, again, has the power. If you're talking oil companies, gas companies, energy companies, they're going to have a lot of power. They've got a lot of money. They are rolling in money, okay? And they're going to be able to sway the conversation, put out publicity and marketing to say how wonderful this is, how great their cleanliness record is, and it may be, But I would just imagine that they're going to have a lot of power in this situation. Yeah, Justin, go ahead.
I was just going to say that obviously the drilling company would have power also, but also the landowner would also have a lot of power, because if they own that land, more than likely they're in a higher class, but the environmental fallout could end up harming those in lower classes. So there's a power dynamic there as well, and because they're making the decision from their, what's economically viable for them, but in the long run, it could end up hurting those who aren't kind of stakeholders in the economic decision, but they end up having to deal with the environmental one.
Yeah. Yeah, and also land ownership in the United States is one of those rights that we hold on to very strongly, perhaps even greater than the common good. Anyway, that's just kind of an exercise to bring it into the present. That is very much in the news right now, Marcellus Shale. We just inaugurated our new governor, Tom Corbett, and there was protests going on during his inauguration because a lot of people are upset about this. Google it sometime. I did that in preparation for class and came across some very interesting resources. So that's a current issue, the Marcellus Shale and how it impacts equity, economy, and the environment. Yes, Rachel.
I was just wondering, in terms of the 3 E's, what I brought up about the health issues, which E is that? Would that be equity?
I would think
about
so.
how people's health is going to be affected?
I would think so. So E for environment. And, of course, health also has economic implications, too. But I would put it most strongly, I think, with equity. Again, equity is kind of the human or the social, the cultural component. I kind of go with equity just because 3 E's sounds better than 2 E's and an S or something like that, okay? But, yeah, it's that human component. Anybody want to tackle Justin's question there? Is the goal of sustainable development to 3 E's equal? Would they be an equilateral triangle? It's a good question. Anybody want to tackle it? I see that hand. Yes, Terry.
I think they're not equal. I think that, if you're looking at power structures, I think the economy has a much bigger say in what goes on than people interested in the environment. The economy always seems to take precedence over environment. So I don't think they are equal. I think they should be equal, but I don't believe that they are.
Thanks, Terry. We need to clear your Emily. Rachel again? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to find the article, but I can't find it. But I know there was one it had like a little diagram saying just that, basically it's not equal, but we should be moving in that direction. I don't know if anyone remembers what article that was in.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about? Basically it was saying that it's not equal, but it should be, and kind of talking about that progress.
Yeah, Jocelyn, did you say IUCN? I think that was the article, yeah.
It's that article.
And guys, because of the crazy weather... Go ahead, Jocelyn, sorry.
Sorry, it's on page 3 if anyone wants to look at it.
Okay, page 3 of the IUCN article. And with the crazy weather and everything, I did not even bring my articles home with me. So, but I've got them memorized by heart, and that's a big joke. But I think that's a part of this critical thinking about sustainable development, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Rachel, because that's just one of those things, like when you start to poke holes and you're saying, I don't know, are these three really equal? And like Terry pointed out, the economy just holds sway right now. I mean, the State of the Union address and all of this, we've got to get the economy growing again. And you can make a good case that a growing economy is very important, but we're just all about that. And equity often takes second or third place, and the environment as well. Yeah, like Justin says, we are great capitalists. And then critically thinking too, or maybe biblically thinking or theologically thinking, we would ask then, how does this fit into what God's intentions are? Does God want them all equal? Or is this a human construct? How do we think biblically about this? So it's a great question. And my comment too, back to would be, in answer to Justin's original question, would be that maybe at various times different things outweigh the other one. In other words, if you have an ecosystem or an environmental area, a landscape that is on the verge of collapse, it could be that you would really want to focus in on that for that time. Or if, for example, there has been economic collapse, people really do need jobs, and that's going to be very important. They're going to have to be able to feed themselves. Go ahead, Justin.
What you were saying, it just reminded me of what Barry in the Wendell Berry's article talking about, like, we only care about certain areas or animals once they're endangered, but we don't we're not proactive about protecting things prior to them being on the verge of non-existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good to pull in that reading, and that's part of why I wanted you to have the Wendell Berry reading. He is a Christian, but also thinking very critically about environmentalism, and he's really poking some holes in it. Okay, and I think it's just one of the best articles I've ever read, very scholarly. It was originally published in Sierra Magazine and led to a firestorm of criticism because those are just things you don't talk about in environmental circles. Pro-choice and environmentalism almost go hand in hand, and he's basically saying, can we really say that we care about the environment if we don't even care for the unborn? So it's a very dramatic statement, and it drew a lot of criticism. As much as Wendell Berry is respected in the environment movement, he took a lot of heat over that essay. All right. Let's go on. I think one thing more we've got to do is we've got to come up with some sort of a class definition. Can we do that? This is the slide from last week, and actually it is the definition from last year. Do you want to come up with your own class definition? You want to just run with this one? I think it's just kind of important for us to be on the same page together. Were you able to give any thought to this definition? What do you think? Rachel wants to have our own. You don't want to go with the 2010 cohort? Want to come up with your new 2011 definition. How can we create then a definition? I'm not sure that this is going to be easy online. Rachel, go ahead.
I think it would be easier to do it in class and to do what we did in Theology of Poverty, where we all wrote we wrote different words on the board that we all wanted to include and then kind of formed them into a definition, if you remember when we did that.
Oh, yeah, I remember. How would you like to lead that process for us, our next class?
Okay.
Okay, so you guys be thinking of what you think is important in our definition, and we'll take a little bit of class time in 2 weeks, our next session, to come up with our own class definition. And that's not easy for me to cede that time because, I love theological thinking, and I think that's one of the most amazing things that we have to offer, the discussion about sustainable development. But we do need to nail this, so we'll do that next time. Okay, so you see Justin's idea there to come up with one version. Let me think just a minute. I've already posted our PSD. Yeah, I think I want to stick with that PSD. So let's go with Justin's idea, come up with your own definition, bring it to class. Rachel will kind of compile them. We'll take a few minutes at the beginning of next class and combine them. Good idea. All right. I want to know what you think of this slide. I guess my title is going to betray it a little bit. Come on, slide. There. This is a diagram of sustainable development. Gotta love it. This actually comes from some curriculum on sustainable development. It's hard to read the words, but I can assure you I don't know that it would be any easier, even if you could read it. But look at that. I mean, there's one thing linking to another thing and swirling around and linking to other things. All of these linkages, okay? You don't really need to even read the words, but, I mean, here's some people that have created curriculum, as you who have had me before know that I give that as an option. I think it's an option. Is it this class? No, it's not. But to design curriculum, because I think it's important to teach and to get these ideas across. But I just don't know that this gets too much. It's really crazy. But that's what we're dealing with, and we want to be able to think critically about this complex issue. Okay, so what is critical thinking? One more slide. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it or not, but I have a rubric of critical thinking up on the internet. But come to think of it, it might be corrupt and I might need to upload it again. But this is from a rubric of critical thinking, and this is the lowest level of critical thinking, so that if you're doing these things, you're not really thinking very critically, okay? If you're biased, or if you hastily dismiss things, if you are ignoring relevant points of view or dismissing them, that's not good critical thinking, okay? If you can't justify what you're saying, if you're closed-minded or even hostile to reason, no, this is narrow thinking. It's not really critical thinking. This is better, this next slide here. Okay, these are some of your high levels of critical thinking. And part of my reason in doing this, not only is it the topic for today, but in all that you write for our class, and in your content facilitations and so on, I want to make sure that you are doing these, that you are accurately presenting evidence and the questions, that you really can identify salient arguments, both pro and con. In other words, if you are pro-environment, That you can't just talk about pro-environment, you know what the other side is saying as well, and you know what their best arguments are. That you can thoughtfully analyze and evaluate different points of view. That you can look at alternative explanations for these things, these events, these ideas. Take an idea that an author says, but, go to the other side of the aisle as well. That you can justify your results and procedures, explain you came up with your ideas and your reasons. That as you follow evidence and your reasons, you do this in a fair-minded way. And then that you're getting to some positive place, too. That you can really make ethical judgments. And I think by ethics it means, coming down on the side of the good. That what you're doing or what you're about is good. Now, what I want to do in the time that remains, and I don't know that we need to spend a lot here, but I do want to talk a little bit about the readings that were assigned for today. I'm at a disadvantage. Like I said, I don't really have them in front of me unless I were to go and download them again or something, but I do have Blewett in front of me. But I'd like to just open the floor to you and see if any of these articles, if you can apply this highest level of critical thinking to any of the articles for today. Let's just take the easiest one probably for us, ethical judgments. We were just talking about Barry. What are some of the ethical judgments that Barry makes, and what do you think about his judgments? And I don't want you to type this in so much as just jump into the conversation. What did you think of Barry and his ethical statements, his ethical judgments? He really ticked off a lot of environmentalists. Okay, so the environmentalists would say, nah. Yes, Rachel.
Well, I guess I was just going to say that, as you mentioned, I was really surprised because when you usually start reading someone that cares about the environment, like you said, you just assume they're liberal. So when he went into the whole part about abortion, I was pretty shocked. And I guess my personal opinion was I thought he had a lot of good things to say, but there are definitely some points I didn't really agree with.
Can you pull up maybe one of those points? But I would be interested in what those are.
That I didn't agree with?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely am more of a pro-choice kind of person. So, well, I guess I appreciated like what he was saying about saying, how can we care about humans but not care about unborn babies? I don't necessarily agree with him.
Okay. I'm trying to relate this back now to our critical thinking rubric. Let's see. Now if we were to go back, and I'm not saying you're doing this, Rachel, at all, back to the lower level, you could just dismiss what he says, right? You could say, okay, well, that's just not relevant, or I have a different opinion. But in a higher level of critical thinking, and I'm not saying you are or aren't doing this, of course, you want to think through what he's saying. What about his evidence? What kind of evidence does Barry provide? For his statements? Okay, his graphs, his tables, his charts. What kind of evidence does Barry present? It's kind of an easy question. There really isn't any evidence, right? I mean, he's making an argument, a philosophical argument. I think he's very eloquent in what he says. I think he says it very well, but it's more of a philosophical piece. Okay? Do you think that Barry thoughtfully analyzes the alternative points of view? Does he get into alternative view in his article? Yeah, I like what Justin says there too. You know, it comes down to ethical judgments, and I'm not sure evidence helps much with that all the time. Okay, so you can't. Yeah, if you were to run a science experiment or something, part of what he's saying is it doesn't necessarily need tables, graphs, and evidence. It's a good point. Okay, the question on the table right now is, does Barry analyze and evaluate major alternative points of view? Yes, Terry.
With the abortion issue, I don't see that he does take another point of view. I think he's pretty strong in what his beliefs are about. He says about taking another person's life. And I'm looking there. He says the usual qualifications hold that if you control your own body only by destroying another person's body, then control comes too late. Self-mastery is the appropriate way to control one's body. So I think he really just is looking one-sided.
Okay. So, pushing you a little bit further, Terry, maybe you would say that his critical thinking is not perhaps at the highest level, and that you would grade him down a little bit. You know?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, I think in a lot of his arguments, he sounds pretty opinionated. I do agree with him on the abortion issue, but he does sound opinionated on this, and he doesn't really back it up with any evidence about his opinions.
Rachel, you've got a comment there. I don't know A.B. Barry. Oh, and about Barry? What do you mean, Rachel, in your text there?
I was just saying, when you were asking about does he address other arguments, he does kind of get into the argument saying a fetus is not a child until it can live outside the womb, and he addresses that a little bit. So I think just in general, the article, his style of writing is very eloquent, but it's not very, I don't know, not scientifical, but you know what I mean? Like, he's not laying out an argument and the pros and cons and both sides. He's just kind of presenting his side in a well-written way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to say about Barry or that article? Trying to think critically about it. Yep.
I'm trying to find where, I can't exactly remember, but it's towards the very beginning whenever he splits it up when he's talking about Stegner and how he splits up the, like, kind of America into those, like, the travelers and those who like use and versus those who are kind of like stay put and don't use. And so I think that's probably the most he goes into, having like opposing sides, and where he talks about things kind of coming against each other. But I think he's using that as the basis, because that's like his introduction and at its conclusion. He's using that as a basis, and I think he just uses the abortion thing as a prime example of like utility or use based on what he says. So I think that's why he brought it in.
All good stuff. Alrighty. Who's number 2? Rachel, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I appreciated his comment about the deserted versus desertification. And kind of, he said that we need to find examples of highlighting, like, I forget what he said, but something about, like, what we do well, like, not just the two extremes. He says you have to present the landscape that humans have used well, and I thought that was a really good point and something that you don't really think about because you usually just hear about the two extremes.
Okay. Well, you got to give him credit for being very brave, I think, for for making us take this. I would think he would have foreseen the firestorm that his comments raised. Justin, did you raise your hand again?
Yes, I did. I think it's funny, like every time someone mentions like abortion or homosexuality, especially in like a Christian circle, everyone kind of like blows up and explodes. But I'm not sure that was like Barry's point. I just think it was because like I don't know what page it is. I think it's page 4 of 9. He says, if we cannot exempt ourselves from use, then we must deal with the issues raised by use. And so the second law said if we want to continue living, we cannot exempt use from care. And then he refers to living like consciously in the world, like as stewards, as our perpetual crisis. And so I think that's what he was talking about on how like how we treat the environment actually like affects our children in the future. And so it kind of comes full circle in that regard. So I know like abortion is like a real hot button and like everyone gets really emotional about it, but I'm sure he had like some intentions, but I'm not sure. I think that because it's such a hot button issue, we might actually be missing the point behind his use of abortion as an argument, and that he's really talking about kind of objectification of humanity and like use.
And somebody think of, if we were to take abortion out, what might be some other issues that he would raise that would make his point also? This objectification of the environment.
I can. I think that the reality is that every day, somewhere between 28,000 and 32,000 children under the age of 5 die of curable diseases and malnutrition. And if that doesn't speak to our obsession with use and like people, if they're not economically viable, then they're not cared for. And so I think that really hits what he's talking about. I think that's a prime example. And it parallels the abortion thing because it's not like there's one thing about an unborn fetus. There's another thing about a born child that suffers and dies because they don't have food or access to medication for a curable disease.
Yeah. Anybody else? Other ways that Barry could have gotten to this same point? So see, what we're doing now is we are looking at other ways of getting to this point, and so we are thinking critically. Yeah, Emily, you?
Yeah, I was going to say genocide, just humans deciding that some humans or one part of God's creation is more important than the other.
Yeah. One that I would add to the mix as well, Justin and Emily, thanks for those, would be I guess our use of creation as entertainment, and how so very often we go on these rafting trips and so on, and it's almost like creation is there for our pleasure, and it just becomes almost a commodity. And I like being outside, and I like having a blast, so I'm not saying, hey, when you go outside you should be sad or something, but I do think that we have so objectified the world that creation becomes basically very little different than a movie theater or a theme park, and you get even some weird comments from people like, I know lifeguards from the Jersey Shore have reported, people asking if they can turn the waves up or asking if they can get rid of this seaweed crap and stuff. It's almost like, hey, I'm here to enjoy, make this a more enjoyable context for me, and I just think we treat the world like it's entertainment. Justin disapproves. You disagree, Justin?
Just about the Jersey Shore thing, and not asking if we can turn the waves up or get rid of the seaweed. I think that's ridiculous.
Well, it is, but I mean, people actually do that, and there are all kinds of these funny quotes that come from national parks and so on, like people at the Grand Canyon saying, "Hey, did the Indians make this?" or things like that people just don't really understand. It would seem what we're dealing with sometimes. Anyway, let's move on and talk. That was a good discussion and some good critical thinking. How about Mabonge? It's pretty bad when the professor can't even say it. Framing the fundamental issues. You'll recall that this article is about Africa and what those issues would be there for Africa. What do you think of that article? Can you think critically about that? Let's use again this rubric here. Is he fair-minded? Would there be alternative points of view? What do you think about that one? Anybody on that one? Yes, Rachel.
Well, he didn't use the 3 E's, but he did talk about like the 4 different types of capital, or 5 if you include. So, like he talked about natural, human, social, and human, and then also economic. So I thought it kind of related to the 3 E's a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
And then he also talked about the 4 pillars: caring, sharing, security, and equity. So I thought it related a little bit to the 3 E's. Maybe not exactly the same, but like that idea of trying to have a balance between multiple things and not just emphasizing one.
Good. Part of why I wanted you to read that article too is that an African perspective, coming from a non-Western country. If I'm remembering correctly, he takes the West to task a little bit too, doesn't he? And so thereby he pokes some holes into it. Did you find? Again, I don't have these articles in front of me; they're sitting on my desk. Did you find that to be the case? Does he, at a time or two, kind of poke some holes into Western thinking of these issues? Yeah, Rachel? Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely think he does, and I can't find the exact quote, but he talks about how Western concepts have been, I forget what word he uses, but basically like thrown on Africa or like applied to Africa, but not really adapted, and he talks about why that hasn't worked. And I thought that was a good point, and kind of his way of saying that, you know, they can use ideas that are Western, but they need to be adapted and appropriate, you know?
Yeah. Great, Rachel. Thanks. Yeah, maybe that would remind you some of your economic development classes and some of those books that you studied. You studied those, didn't you? Like The White Man's Burden and, you know, these other Western approaches to development. So is sustainable development just another Western approach? Does it need to be adapted? Does it need to be questioned? Need to think critically about it, and so on. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have anything extensive to say, but I think it was definitely helpful to have a different perspective and kind of help kind of shake us awake from our typical white man messiah complex. That kind of some development, especially in the past, is kind of focused on and kind of looking towards a more integrated, partnership-based, kind of egalitarian-esque style of doing development. So I think that was helpful.
Yeah, I always like you to have variety of things to look at, and to read. That's always one of my goals. All right, I want to wrap up a little bit soon. Basically, I think this type of involvement is good. I think this has been a great class, but it is a little bit tedious and hard. So can we just lump the rest of the articles together? Lazarowitz, the IUCN article, and then the Egeman Evans article. And I wanted you to think about urban communities as well. Is there anything that you would want to say about those? And again, applying our critical thinking rubric about it. Any evidence, things that they present, graphics? You were mentioning the graphics earlier in the IUCN article. Let's see if we can wrap this up here. And I apologize for this, but it's been a long day for me. Anyway. Anything on those articles? Justin, go ahead.
I think the Egeman and Evans article was, I'm not so sure that there were a lot of arguments, whereas it was just kind of examples of kind of a style of doing sustainable things in urban communities in a just manner. And so the diagrams and just kind of examples of what has worked in the past, I think that was helpful. And that was a pretty good article, I thought.
How about that title, though? Just sustainability? Is there unsustainability?
I think if you look at our current global economic system, sure, definitely. I'm not sure how you could not say that there is. I think actually probably sustainable development is just switching from unjust sustainability to just sustainability. That might be another aspect of the triangle I was talking about. I don't know. At this point, I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm done.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say that I liked hearing about kind of just sustainability as it relates to urban development. Since, that's not my focus. I don't really know too much about urban development, and it was really interesting to hear about the different initiatives and projects since they highlighted a lot of those things I've never even heard of before. So I thought, it was encouraging and interesting to kind of just hear a different perspective. I feel like we talk a lot about, the developing world. We talk about what does sustainability look like in a city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want you guys to be exposed to those issues as well, so that explains the inclusion of that article. The IUCN article, okay. Justin, yeah.
I was just going to quickly comment on what Rachel was just saying. Yeah, I think oftentimes we hear developing world or majority world or all these different labels that we have, and oftentimes we forget that there are urban areas there. Like we think of the international focus as being like, oh, we're going to go and live in a rural area and do development there. But I don't know. I think that it's just. I'm glad you included this because it reminds us not only. I mean, it used urban examples from the states in this article, but I think it's important to realize that there are urban areas, especially with like urban drift and things like that, and slums. Like there's a lot to be done in urban areas in pretty much everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just to argue with myself a little bit too, as I prepared for this course, not necessarily this class, I searched the internet high and low for all kinds of video clips that could provide content on various issues of sustainability. So I would go to these conferences, like at the University of Missouri, they had one, or places just to see if there's any lecture content out there that we could pull into our class to make it richer, so that it's, you could have like a Jeffrey Sachs or somebody come in and talk about sustainability. And I was kind of surprised with the highfalutin, if I can say that, maybe betray my southern roots there a little bit, but just a lot of the issues that they talked about just wouldn't really even apply. I mean, they were talking about, water treatment and that kind of thing, and sustainability. They would have these lectures involved on sustainability, but it didn't really have that much to do with the poor. It was more, I don't know, geared toward North American issues, which are often very much, very different than the rest of the world. So I really couldn't find a lot of content because it seemed like they were always talking about, mass transit and stuff like that. And I believe in transit, but if you're in a village in Africa, that's not necessarily an issue or a problem. So anyway, I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying so much as just saying that sustainable issues, I guess, would be defined by the kind of world that you live in. All right. I was starting to talk about the IUCN article. I found myself slapped around a little bit by that one. I don't know if you shared that, but it's kind of like the first part of that article is talking about how terrible everything is, and we do face some very serious challenges. And then I guess the last half of the article, they're trying to say something positive, but I thought that one was very well written. It's a very good overview of the status of sustainability. But I guess I include that one because it as an example of critical thinking too, because they're saying, okay, what is the future of this concept? And then they say, well, there's a lot of problems with it. And then they say, well, yeah, but there's some signs of hope too. I don't know. What do you think of the IUCN one? Yeah, Rachel, I agree. It was very readable. Anybody else want to comment on IUCN? Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
I was going to say that I felt like it was hopeful at the end, but like a lot of these articles tend to be kind of vague, just saying like there's a lot of work to be done for the next generation and we need to partner together. But they didn't really get into specifics, and that can be a bit frustrating after you read all the information that they provide on the background. I would have liked them to go a little more in depth of like what is their plan,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How does the Lazarowitz article poke holes in what we've been saying about sustainability and sustainable development? And this will be our last one. Lazarowitz, how do they poke holes in sustainability? Go ahead, Terry.
Well, with all the surveys and things they did, they said that people say that they want sustainability, and they have these high belief systems, but then when it really comes down to it, they're not willing to do what they say that they want to do. Like people said that they would pay more money for hybrid cars, but they're actually not buying them. So people are saying things, but they're with their values, but their attitudes aren't. There's a big gap in that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Terry, earlier in our class, you raised the issue of consumerism, and that is one of those components that does whittle away at sustainable development. You know, we are a nation of consumers, the West, the Northern Hemisphere, however you want to spin that out. We love our stuff, so how can we really reach sustainable development with such high levels of consumerism? Anybody else? All right. Well, I think we've accomplished a lot. I think it's kind of hard to sit and stare at a computer, so I don't want to do the whole full 3 hours. But this topic is so important that we've got to touch some of this. I just think it's important that we not just come to a sustainable development class and praise it up and down, although I do think it's a compelling idea, but just realize, too, that there are other ways of approaching this. There are ways to criticize it or parts of it, and how then do we respond? You know, I would think you would say, oh, well, Stan's an environmentalist, so of course he's going to say sustainable development is the best thing since sliced bread, or, but what are these factors that we can use to criticize this topic? Because we want to be real and authentic, but also as graduate students, we're supposed to be all about that, and thinking through these issues. Last week we talked about the fellow who said that sustainable development is an oxymoron. Remember that? Had sustainable and development. The two things don't even go together. One of your articles for this week really talked a lot about environmental justice, and that is a huge issue. When you talk about sustainable development, are you just talking about the rich multinational corporations making a lot more money, but maybe doing it in a nicer way while they hug some trees? What about the poor? What about the indigenous? What about the different ethnicities? Are they receiving justice as well? Low levels of democracy. How can we really reach sustainable development in a world where there are such huge power structures? Just a lot of the scholars who think about sustainability do believe that one of the best ways to get there is through democracy, because democracy is, right, a government for the people and by the people, so there should be a bit more equity and equality here rather than just more good stuff for those who already have good stuff, or more power for those who already are powerful. All right. I'm going to conclude the class today.